Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into the world of polished copper, warm bread, and the steady rhythm of hands that have known the same work for generations. It's still night outside, the deep, blue-black kind of dark that belongs entirely to the hour before dawn. In the kitchens of the Ottoman palace, the air holds a hush, a sense that even the walls are holding their breath for the first clatter of the day. You probably wouldn't survive this schedule, not unless you can wake up while the stars are still bright, slide out of a thin blanket in a room without a fire, and start your work without so much as a coffee to steady you. But here, this is simply the shape of life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in from somewhere far away, or very near, post your location and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious where in the world my little stories find you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass through an arched doorway into the Maya, the imperial kitchen complex. Above you, tall chimneys rise like sentinels, their mouths ready to carry the day's smoke to the sky. Inside, the shadows are long, cast by narrow lamps set in wall niches. The lamp's light pulls gently, catching on the curves of hanging pans and the rims of stacked copper cauldrons. The floor is cool beneath your feet, smoothed by centuries of shuffling steps and heavy pots being carried from hearth to table. The space smells faintly of last night's baking, a ghost of flour and yeast, with just a whisper of spice clinging to the stones. A pair of servants are already moving between the long counters. One carries a bundle of thin kindling, tied neatly with twine. The other has a basket of flatbreads, wrapped in linen against the damp night air. They greet each other with nods, not words, preserving the quiet for just a few moments longer. Mainstream fact: the imperial kitchens of Topkapi Palace were vast, capable of feeding hundreds every day, and arranged in separate sections for different dishes and ranks. There were halls for soups, for sweets, for bread, and even for sherbets. In this early hour, though, they all feel like one breathing, sleeping body that's just beginning to stir. You trail your fingers along a wooden worktable, feeling the small ridges and cuts left by knives, mortars, and countless meals prepared here. The surface is dusted lightly with flour, as if the kitchen itself left a little reminder of yesterday's work. From somewhere deeper in the complex comes the faint sound of water, the courtyard fountain running over marble, ready for the first of many buckets to be dipped and carried. The donkey in our last tale would have complained about the cold stone, but here, the cooks and scullions accept it as part of the trade. They've walked these floors in every season, in winter, when their breath made little clouds, and in summer, when the heat from the ovens pressed on them like an extra garment. One young kitchen hand walks past you carrying a shallow tray of brass cups, each catching the lamplight in warm crescents. They will be filled later, but for now, they look like a promise. Quirky tidbit: in the Ottoman palace, servants often knew their positions for life, with specific roles passing from father to son. A man who began by sweeping flour from the bakery floor could end his days overseeing the entire bread division, his name remembered in the kitchen's own oral history. The head cook, a broad-shouldered man with a crimson sash, appears briefly in the doorway, scanning the room. His eyes linger on the empty hearths as if they were clocks not yet wound. Without a word, he disappears again, his footfalls muffled by the thick stone. Historians still argue whether the earliest meals of the palace staff were purely functional: bread, olives, a hot drink, or if they included more refined touches even for the lower ranks. Records suggest that in the kitchens closest to the Sultan's table, even a servant's breakfast might include fresh fruit, honey, or a slice of cheese from the palace's own herds. You pause under a high archway, watching the scene like a painting slowly gaining color. A pot is placed on a trivet, a ladle rests against a bowl, and a low murmur begins between two cooks, soft enough to blend with the crackle of the first kindling catching in the hearth. The day has begun, though the sun has not yet risen. The first thing you notice now is the sound. It's still gentle, but no longer shy. The soft rush of water from the courtyard fountain, the rhythmic chop of a knife against a well-worn board, the muted thud of a pestle inside a mortar. These are the kitchen's early morning greetings, the sort that don't need words. Somewhere near the far hearth, a little cascade of sparks leaps upward as dry pine kindling catches. The flame's orange light shivers across the brass coffee pots hanging in a neat line on the wall, turning them briefly into tiny suns. The air warms just a fraction, carrying with it a more confident aroma, smoke mingled with the faint sweetness of last night's roasted chestnuts. Still lingering. A boy no older than 12 enters through the side door, balancing a wide copper ewer against his hip. He's come from the courtyard, where the fountain gurgles steadily into its stone basin. The water inside the ewer ripples and sloshes with each step, catching the light so it glimmers like liquid glass. He sets it gently on a bench, wipes his hands on his tunic, and goes back for another load. Mainstream fact: fresh water was drawn every morning for drinking, cooking, and washing, and in the Ottoman palace kitchens, it often came from elaborately tiled fountains that also served as decorative showpieces. The designs weren't just for beauty. Many carried inscriptions in flowing calligraphy, offering blessings over the food to be made. On the long counter to your right, a pair of older kitchen hands work in easy silence. One slices dried apricots into thin curls, their orange and gold bright against the pale wood. The other stirs a clay jar of tahini, slow and careful, as if coaxing the sesame paste into wakefulness. Quirky tidbit: some palace servants believe that stirring anything in the morning should be done clockwise only, to invite the day to turn in your favor. The superstition wasn't written into any official rulebook, but in a kitchen where rituals and routines mattered, even a habit like this could last centuries. You drift toward the open arch leading to the courtyard. The fountain stands in the center, its edges worn smooth where countless hands have rested ewers for filling. Water arcs from its spouts into a shallow basin, each stream catching the lantern glow. The air here is cooler, fresher, with the faintest trace of mint from a nearby planter. A senior servant, his hair bound neatly under a linen cap, is checking the supply of clean copper pots stacked by the wall. He runs a cloth over each one, not because they are dirty, they shine so well you can see the ghost of your reflection, but because that's how you prove you care about the work. Historians still argue whether the palace's emphasis on spotless copper was purely for hygiene or partly for prestige. After all, an immaculate pot reflects the wealth and discipline of the entire household, not just the man who polishes it. From somewhere beyond the courtyard, a muffled laugh reaches you, the kind that slips out before the day's seriousness takes hold. The boy with the copper ewer returns, cheeks pink from the chill, and sets another one down beside the first. His eyes follow a cat that slipped into the courtyard, tail high, clearly on its own early errand. The cat pauses at the fountain's edge to drink, ignoring the boy, the pots, and the vast empire of breakfast preparations unfolding around it. In a place as formal as the palace, perhaps only cats can be so casual. Back inside, the first real hint of breakfast's heart emerges, the scent of yeast and warm grain as someone opens the door to the bread ovens. You'll get to that soon enough. For now, you're content to stand by the fountain, listening to the small but steady symphony of water, fire, and knife, each note easing the kitchen fully into day. You turn back from the arch and step into the slow choreography of water. The courtyard is a square of pale stone whose center is ruled by the fountain, and around it the morning arranges itself like a calm sentence. Subject, verb, object, ewers fill, hands carry, mouths bless. A line has formed without being announced. No one hurries. Haste wakes noise, and noise wakes mistakes. The boy with pink cheeks returns again, this time with a leather shoulder strap to cradle the copper ewer against his ribs. He hooks the strap, tests the balance, and waits his turn behind two older men who carry twin ewers on a yoke. Each vessel pendulums in gentle opposition so the load rides easy over stone. The water is cold enough to sting when it kisses the brass rims. Steam ghosts faintly where warm fingers meet chill metal. Close up, the fountain's face is a panel of tiles the color of clouds at the edge of dawn, whites, blues, a hint of leaf green. A line of flowing script runs along the arch, a blessing over food, over hands, over the lips that will taste this water and the bread it helps become. One servant touches the calligraphy with his fingertips the way you might touch the railing before you climb a familiar stair. Not a ritual anyone wrote down, just a habit that feels like thanks. Mainstream fact: the palace kitchens drew from the great Kirk-Sezim waterworks. Architect Sinan's 16th century system of aqueducts and channels feeding Istanbul from the Belgrade forest. Fountains like this one were more than decoration. They were terminals of a city-wide artery, kept clean, inspected, and engraved with prayers because water, like bread, made the court possible. A copper ladle hangs from a chain on the fountain's lip. You watch a senior cook dip it, taste, and nod, as solemn as a steward sampling wine. Water can betray you if it turns. Today it's sweet, lively on the tongue, a small promise that the dough will rise and the coffee will sing. He hands the ladle to the boy with a grin so quick it almost doesn't happen. The boy tastes too and glows. Quirky tidbit: some kitchen hands say the first ladle in the morning belongs to the house cat, so the day won't scratch. The tabby from earlier reappears precisely then, leaps onto the fountain's base with the entitled grace of a minor official, and laps once, twice, 3 times. An approving blink. Stamped, someone whispers. The cat leaves as if it has signed a decree. Joke 1 lands softly. 3 shoulders shake and then pretend not to. You take a place to the side where a bench holds drying cloths and a stack of hammered copper basins. A pair of scullions begin a quiet cycle that will last till noon. Draw water, pour into lidded jars in the cool pantry. Draw again, fill the washing tubs that line the far wall. Draw again, decant into small brass kettles for the coffee hearth. Nothing is wasted. The rinse from washing greens goes to the herb planters. The final splash from a basin goes to darken the courtyard dust where feet will pass. The head cook appears, chalk in hand, and marks a slate beside the door, 3 lines and a curl. It isn't writing in the sense of letters. It is a code about water, kitchen, pantry, coffee. One glance later he knows what needs topping up and what can wait. The boy with the strap watches the chalk marks with the concentration of a student learning a new alphabet. Historians still argue whether the precise morning sequence, who drew first, which hearth received sweet water versus boiled, was governed by written regulation or by habit and personality. Kitchen records give rules, memoirs give exceptions. You suspect both were true, an official order to please the scribes, and an older, unwritten rhythm that pleased the work. On the far side of the courtyard, a low bronze basin, wide as a shield, has been set over a small charcoal brazier. Into it, an older woman tips a jug of cold water and a handful of crushed rose leaves. The heat will coax fragrance out of the petals. Later, A cloth dipped in the warm rosewater will wipe the rims of bowls and the handles of trays destined for important hands. Cleanliness, yes, but also grace. Dionysus would have approved of the flourish. The donkey would have asked whether roses improve grip. You keep that thought to yourself and smile. The boy returns again with 2 ewers at once, arms straining, and a taller apprentice steps in behind him, catching one handle with a practiced hook of fingers. Share the weight, he murmurs. Joke too comes out as advice. Water tastes better when you don't spill it on your feet. The boy answers with a grin so wide you can see the future cook in it. A senior steward with a notebook of beautiful neat lines begins his round. He taps a lidded jar with the back of a knuckle, listening for fullness, then lifts the lid and inhales, as if scent can tell him what sight cannot. Satisfied, he makes a tiny mark. He checks the washing basins, one for copper, one for earthenware, one for the delicate porcelain reserved for the highest table. In the corner, a dish of sand waits for the soft scouring that water alone cannot do. Mainstream fact returns in the form of ablution. Before the first trays will be carried toward the inner court, hands are washed at a secondary spout fitted low for easy reach. Small ewers sit ready with fresh water, and a pile of linen cloths waits in a warm niche so the chill won't bite the fingers. It is practical and polite, and to many, devotional too, work beginning with clean hands and a murmured bismillah. You drift closer as a cook lifts a clay jar from a cool alcove and passes it to a second cook who's weighing out flour. He pours exactly a ladleful into the dough bowl, no more. Bread remembers, he says, half to himself. If yesterday's dough was thirsty and today's is not, the first rise will tell the tale in an hour, and everyone will pretend they knew it all along. Quirky tidbit again. A few of the older bakers refuse to let anyone whistling near the fountain. They claim whistling invites wind and wind teases the fires. Today no one whistles. They hum instead, a short, even phrase that sounds a lot like a cradle song for kettles. As the run of yours continues, you notice the patterns of metal. The tall-necked ones for pouring into narrow coffee pots. The squat-bellied ones for washing vegetables. The wide-mouthed basins for rinsing fruit. Dents are not defects here, they are biographies. One ewer has a crescent-shaped bruise near the base, a reminder of a winter when ice made the courtyard treacherous, and a young scullion learned to land with his elbows tucked. The ewer still pours true. So does the scullion. The sky over the courtyard shifts from black to blue to that thin, honest gray that means the muezzin will soon call and the ovens will begin to exhale. Your breath shows once, then not at all. Somewhere in the bread hall a paddle knocks against the rim. Wood on clay, the sound of dough cupped and turned. A quiet voice near you says, 2 more runs, then coffee. You feel the sentence lift everyone's shoulders by a comfortable fraction. Historians still argue whether coffee entered the palace kitchens first as medicine, novelty, or necessity. The dates overlap, the anecdotes contradict, and the ledgers are stingy with romance. What survives plainly is habit. By the later 16th century, coffee hearths work like small suns inside the larger fire cosmos of the kitchens, fed by this same water, measured by this same ladle. The boy with the strap returns just as the tabby cat hops back onto the fountain edge for a second audit. It sniffs, drinks, then approves with the slow blink that seals a contract. We thank the inspector, the head cook says, passing as if he hasn't looked up. Joke 3 ripples politely and then is tucked away. Someone wipes the fountain's lip with a cloth, a gesture as old as the house and as new as this morning. A last ewer fills. Handles squeak softly against straps. The chain-hung ladle comes to rest, swinging once, twice, then still. The courtyard seems to stand an inch taller. Inside, a runner calls softly down the hall. Bread to the page's room. Another answers. Coffee embers ready. The chalkboard bears fresh marks. The rosewater lifts a breath of summer into winter air. You step back from the fountain, its tile face shining, its blessing traced again with damp fingers by a man whose father taught him which curve of script to favor. The first light finally tips over the wall and sends a thin ribbon across the water's skin. You follow the ewers into the kitchens, into the next motion, toward yeast and heat, toward the first cups, toward the small kindnesses of a day that has chosen to be generous. The bread ovens breathe like sleeping beasts, slow, steady, and warm enough to tint the air with that impossible scent of crust and hearth. The doorway into the bakery is low and arched, so you duck as you enter, stepping into a space where the glow comes not from lamps but from the oven mouths themselves. They are set deep into the wall, their wide jaws ringed with soot and a faint shimmer of heat. In front of them, racks of loaves wait like silent sentries, all baked in the deepest hours before even the fountain was disturbed. You can see the faint sheen on their crusts, a sign of steam trapped under cloth until just now. The loaves are oval, some marked with crosshatch lines from the baker's reed knife, others plain, destined for the simplest breakfasts of the youngest palace pages. Mainstream fact: the imperial bakery in the Topkapi Palace was among the largest in the empire, producing thousands of loaves daily, each type designated for specific ranks and duties. Coarser bread for the janissaries, fine white bread for the sultan's table, and everything in between for the labyrinth of staff in between. Two bakers are lifting loaves from wicker baskets and placing them in neat rows on a long table. The wood underneath is still warm from the basket's journey across the courtyard. The sound of bread being handled is unexpectedly soft, just a hushed thump as each loaf meets the table, and the occasional whisper of crust rubbing against linen. Quirky tidbit: some bakers insisted that bread should be stacked with crusts facing outward so the bread can breathe. Others claimed it kept away kitchen mice, who supposedly disliked facing a wall of crust. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or just an old trick for letting steam escape evenly. A young apprentice works at the far end of the table, slicing a few loaves with a long, thin blade. He cuts carefully, the bread sighing under the steel. These are for immediate serving, the ones that will be sent, still faintly steaming, to the servants' quarters for those already on their feet. The head baker moves through the room like a conductor, a glance here, a nod there, a small hand gesture that sends a loaf to the sultan's breakfast tray instead of the steward's. His robe is dusted white with flour, and there's a smudge on his cheek he hasn't noticed, or hasn't bothered to wipe. Historians still argue whether palace bakers used sourdough starters exclusively or whether yeast was occasionally purchased from city markets to speed production. Records show both methods in different years, but the bread you smell now feels like it has a lineage, deep, tangy, older than any man in the room. A tray is laid out for the palace pages, thick slices of warm bread, small clay dishes of briny olives, and a pot of honey so dark it's almost bronze. The bread will be dipped, spread, or simply eaten warm with fingers still smelling faintly of fountain water. At the far wall, a small hatch opens, and in comes a basket of dried figs from the storeroom. The figs are split and pressed into the warm bread for those who will be walking long corridors all morning. They make a quiet little squish as the baker's thumb presses them in place. The donkey from another tale would have stolen 3 figs by now. Here, the only thief is the kitchen cat, slipping in to sit near the oven's warmth. One of the bakers drops it a crumb of bread, which the cat ignores entirely, as though carbs are beneath it. You watch as a few of the finest loaves, lighter in color, smooth in shape, are wrapped in linen and tied with narrow silk ribbons. These are for the upper court, where presentation is as important as flavor. A junior baker is tasked with carrying them, and he cradles the basket like it's holding eggs. Quirky tidbit: palace bread sometimes bore stamped designs from carved wooden seals, floral patterns, stars, or calligraphy. The seals were dipped in water to keep dough from sticking, and the resulting loaves had a faintly ceremonial feel even when eaten in private. The oven doors are closed for now, the next round of baking set for later in the morning. You notice a wide paddle leaning against the wall, its handle smooth from years of use. The edge is darkened, not burnt, but marked by countless loaves sliding on and off in silence. As the trays are loaded, bread for pages, for stewards, for cooks who've been at work since before moonset, you hear the low rumble of satisfaction that comes when the work matches the rhythm. Bread is life here, but it's also pride, measured in even crusts, and the way each slice holds together in the hand. Outside, the courtyard is shifting again. The smell of coffee drifts faintly through the archway, and somewhere, the honey jars are being opened. But for now, your senses are wrapped in the warmth of bread and the quiet certainty that the day's foundation has been laid, golden, fragrant, and ready for the tables ahead. The coffee hearth sits apart from the bread ovens, in a smaller room where the walls are lined with shelves of brass pots, long-handled spoons, and neat rows of small porcelain cups. Here, the air smells different, less of yeast and ash, more of roasted beans and that faintly smoky perfume that only coffee gives when it first begins to bloom in hot water. 3 cooks are gathered around the low charcoal braziers. Each brazier glows with a bed of embers the color of pomegranate seeds, throwing off just enough heat to coax, not boil. On top sit long-necked copper sieves, their sides catching the firelight in little crescents. The sound here is subtle, a faint hiss, the whisper of liquid thickening, the occasional tap of a spoon against metal. Mainstream fact: coffee came to the Ottoman court in the mid-16th century and quickly became an essential part of palace life, with its own specialists, the kavasibasi, or chief coffee maker, who oversaw every step, from bean selection to brewing. Serving coffee was an art of timing, temperature, and presentation. 1 Cook sprinkles the freshly ground coffee into a sieve, stirring slowly so the powder darkens the water into deep brown. He adds a pinch of sugar to one pot, none to another, each destined for a different palate. The smell is enough to make you feel briefly more awake, though you're here for the story, not the caffeine. Quirky tidbit: some palace coffee makers swore by adding a single grain of cardamom to each pot for luck and clarity, while others said cardamom spoiled the purity of the brew. The debate could last longer than the coffee took to drink. On a side table, tiny porcelain cups are laid out, each nested in a filigree silver holder so fingers never touch the hot rim. Linen napkins, no larger than the span of a hand, are folded into little fans beside them. These will go on trays for senior servants and visiting dignitaries, but not for everyone. Coffee here is both a drink and a privilege. Historians still argue whether the early morning coffee was meant only for the Sultan and high officials or whether certain kitchen ranks also received it before the main meal. Diaries suggest both. Sometimes a generous kavasibasi would share with the cooks who had been working since midnight. Other times the rules were strictly kept. You lean closer as one sieve begins to rise, the dark liquid climbing toward the lip. The cook lifts it smoothly, letting the foam settle before setting it back down, an old trick to build richness. The donkey from that other road trip would have dipped its nose right in. Here, the coffee is guarded like treasure. At a bench in the corner, a young apprentice grinds beans in a tall brass mill, the handle turning with a steady rhythm. The grounds spill into a shallow dish, their fragrance cutting through even the strongest bread scent from the next room. He pauses to tap the mill and check the fineness. Too coarse and the brew will be weak, too fine and it risks scorching. 1 Pot is ready. The cook pours slowly into the first cup, the foam gliding to the surface without breaking. This cup will go to the chief steward, who is already somewhere down the marble hall checking linens for the Sultan's breakfast. Another cup is filled and set aside for the head cook, whose word will guide the rest of the morning. A tray is prepared, 4 cups, a small dish of sugar lumps, and a tiny glass of cool water for each drinker. The tray is polished until it reflects the glow of the embers. The carrier lifts it with both hands, bowing his head slightly before stepping into the corridor. Quirky tidbit. The cool water wasn't just refreshment. It allowed the drinker to cleanse the palate so the coffee's flavor could be savored fully. Some even believed water before coffee told the stomach what was coming. Another says bubbles softly, and the room's rhythm resets. Grind, stir, lift, pour. Outside the doorway, the sound of the courtyard fountain still threads faintly through, a reminder that even the richest brew depends on the plainest element. You imagine the first sip, the bitterness tempered by sugar or spice, the heat curling into the chest. In the palace kitchens, coffee is not yet the casual drink it will become in later centuries. It's a morning ritual, slow and deliberate, like the opening notes of a song that will carry through the whole day. From the bread room comes the sound of trays being stacked, their contents ready to pair with the dark, fragrant cups. Soon, coffee and bread will meet in marble corridors and silk-draped chambers. But for now, here in the coffee hearth's quiet glow, the world feels as small and warm as the porcelain cups in their silver cradles. The smell changes as you leave the coffee hearth. It becomes softer, sweeter, not the roasted sharpness of beans, but the sunlit promise of honey and the cool creaminess of milk pulled from the coldest corners of the pantry. You follow it into a room lined with stone shelves, each shelf holding treasures in clay, glass, or copper. Two servants are already at work at the center table. One is unsealing a tall earthen jar, its lid bound with waxed cloth to keep the air out. As the cover peels away, the jar's golden cargo catches the light, thick honey, so viscous it moves with the unhurried grace of syrup in winter. The scent is deep and floral, like a meadow pressed into amber. Mainstream fact: the Ottoman palace received honey from many corners of the empire, from the thyme-covered hills of the Aegean to the pine forests of Anatolia. Each had its own flavor and color, and records show the kitchens sometimes blended them to create a consistent taste for the sultan's table. The other servant is working with a wide, shallow copper bowl set into a ring of cool marble. He's whisking cream that was brought in before dawn from the palace dairies. The cream is so fresh it still holds the faintest chill from the animals, and as it thickens under his rhythm, it turns glossy and pale, holding little peaks that catch the lamplight. Quirky tidbit: some cooks swore that cream whipped in a stone bowl tasted better than cream whipped in metal, claiming the marble calmed the milk. Whether true or not, the practice persisted, perhaps because the cool stones slowed the cream's warming and made the work more pleasant on hot mornings. A third servant enters, carrying a basket of small, blue and white porcelain dishes, each no larger than a palm. He begins to ladle a spoonful of cream into each dish, topping some with a drizzle of honey, others with a scatter of crushed pistachios. These will travel to the Sultan's breakfast chamber, but also to the senior viziers, whose own tables are set apart from the main household. Historians still argue whether this morning cream and honey ritual was purely for taste or had a symbolic meaning, sweetness and richness to start the day, perhaps as a subtle omen for court affairs. From the shelves, another jar is opened, this one holding something darker. Molasses made from grapes. Its scent is sharp and wine-like, and it will be served to some of the older staff who prefer its tang to honey's sweetness. In the corner, a boy is arranging small honeycombs on a silver tray. The combs glisten, their tiny hexagons perfect. He pauses to lift one toward the light, the amber catching and glowing as though it has its own inner fire. The donkey from Dionysus's road trip would have been unbearable in this room. A large copper pot is brought in from the courtyard, its base still damp from washing. Into it goes a mixture of warm milk and crushed almonds, stirred until it forms a pale, fragrant drink. This, too, is for select tables, meant to soothe the stomach before richer foods arrive. Quirky tidbit: palace servants sometimes hid tiny messages for each other in the patterns of honey drizzles. A swirl meant good news, a crosshatch meant be careful. Whether the messages were taken seriously or not, The idea added a private kind of play to an otherwise meticulous job. The table is a quiet theater of movement, honey poured in threads so thin they vanish into the cream, pistachios sprinkled with a pinch so exact it could be measured against a ruler, bowls shifted by a finger's width so they form neat, symmetrical rows. Each gesture has been repeated so many times it's almost unconscious, yet still exact. From the doorway, you can see the bread trays being passed along the corridor. Soon, one of those trays will be paired with these small dishes, creating a breakfast that is both humble in size and extravagant in care. The chief steward steps in briefly, his eyes scanning the table. He plucks up a dish, tilts it slightly to see the honey catch the light, then sets it down again without a word. The two servants glance at each other, the smallest lift of an eyebrow. Approval granted. As you step back into the corridor, you carry with you the scent of honey and the cool memory of cream in stone. Outside, the sound of the fountain drifts faintly again, but the air here is warmer, fuller, as if the palace itself has taken its first, satisfied bite of the day. You follow the honey-scented corridor toward a room where voices are already in gentle disagreement. The tone is polite, almost sleepy, but the topic is one that never fails to rouse opinion. Eggs. Two senior kitchen hands stand over a pot of water simmering on a small brazier. One holds a sandglass in his palm, letting the grains slide through while keeping a careful eye on the surface of the water. The other leans against the table, arms crossed, ready to argue. Mainstream fact: in the Ottoman palace, soft-boiled eggs were a breakfast staple, prized for their simplicity and quick preparation. But soft was open to interpretation. Some favored a runny yolk, others a just set center. Without mechanical timers, cooks relied on sandglasses, counting prayers, or the subtle sound of a boiling change to judge doneness. The first cook insists the eggs must be lifted just before the sand runs out. Let the yolk wave like the Bosphorus tide. The second claims a longer boil makes for a sturdier breakfast, especially for pages who have hours of errands ahead. They both agree that anything past that is an insult to the egg. Quirky tidbit: some cooks claimed that a few drops of vinegar in the water kept the shells from cracking, while others swore by whispering the Sultan's name as the eggs were lowered in. The latter wasn't written down, but it was known, a superstition wrapped in respect. Nearby, a younger servant is lining up small ceramic egg cups, each one with a tiny painted flower inside the bowl so that, when the egg is eaten, the blossom appears like a secret reward. The donkey from Dionysus's tale would have eaten the shells just to get to the flowers. A pot of salt stands open, the crystals large and pale. Beside it, a smaller dish holds ground black pepper, its scent tickling the air. For the highest tables, a pinch of cinnamon might even be offered, an unusual pairing, but one that some courtiers swore by for its warming effect. Historians still argue whether the palace eggs came solely from the royal estates or were sometimes purchased from trusted city vendors to meet the morning's demand. The ledgers hint at both, suggesting that supply chains could bend to urgency. The first batch of eggs is lifted from the pot with a long-handled slotted spoon, each one placed gently into a cloth-lined basket. The cook tips the basket slightly so the shells dry in the faint warmth of the brazier. A second pot is already coming to the boil, ready for the next run. One egg is cracked open for testing. The yolk slips out, golden and trembling, holding its shape just long enough to break at the touch of a spoon. The cook holding the sandglass smirks, as though to say, "Told you so." His rival shrugs and concedes the point, for today. Quirky tidbit: there was a quiet hierarchy to who cracked which eggs. Lower-ranked servants ate theirs whole in the shell, while higher tables had them peeled and sliced onto plates with herbs scattered over the top. Sometimes the pattern of the herbs scatter hinted at the mood of the cook that day: a straight line for hurry, a small circle for contentment. The egg cups are filled, the tops tapped neatly off with a small silver knife. The yolks glow in the lamplight, each one waiting for the first pinch of salt. Trays are readied, the eggs nestled between slices of warm bread and a small dish of olives. From the hallway comes the clink of more dishes being set out, the day's breakfast growing piece by piece. The argument about boiling time may be over for now, but tomorrow the sand glass will be turned again, the water will bubble, and the quiet contest will resume. You step back toward the corridor, the scent of eggs and pepper lingering just enough to follow you into the next moment of the morning. You follow a cooler draft down a side corridor where the stones grow darker and the air tightens to a whisper. The temperature drops a steady thumb width with every step, and soon the hallway opens onto a low vaulted cellar where the morning has not quite arrived. Here the light is gray and patient, and the world smells of milk turned thoughtful. Clay jars rest on wooden trestles in tidy rows, each sealed with a circle of linen tied by twine. A damp hush clings to the walls. A thin line of condensation beads along the rims where cool and warmer air agree to meet. A cellar boy moves between the stands with a brass-handled hook, loosening knots the way a scribe loosens ink, carefully, without rushing the first word. When he lifts the cloth, a quiet, sour-sweet breath escapes. Yogurt. Mainstream fact. Ottoman kitchens relied on earthenware for storing and setting yogurt. The porous clay breathed just enough to keep it cool, and the mass itself continued to firm overnight. In summer, jars were often kept near ice brought from palace icehouses, carlicane, or shaded fountains to help the set hold its shape. A senior dairy hand arrives with a shallow copper basin and a muslin cloth draped like a pale cloud. He speaks little, but his hands have long conversations. He dips a short wooden ladle into the first jar and draws up a scoop so thick it mounds in the spoon. The yogurt folds into the muslin with a soft sound, more a suggestion than a splash. Bit by bit the cloth fills. The corners are knotted and the bundle hung from a peg to drip, a slow snow becoming a denser whiteness. Quirky tidbit. Some kitchen workers named their strainers, as if befriending them would coax a gentler curd. White bird, little net. Even. Moonbag. This one, someone has inked along the hem in tiny letters, Sabasukutu. Morning quiet. It earns the title, drop by patient drop. While the strained yogurt, Susmi, thickens, another team begins ladling plain yogurt into porcelain bowls rimmed in cobalt and gold. They move with the rhythm of breath, lift, tilt, settle, wipe the rim with a cloth dampened in rosewater. A steward tests the wobble by nudging a bowl with the back of a fingernail. It trembles and returns to itself, as poised as a courtier. These are destined for dignitaries who prefer their mornings cool and clean. A spoon traveling in small crescents across a pale sea dot on a side table. A tray of accompaniments waits. Sprigs of mint. A dusting of sumac for those who like a tart brightness. Honey for softness. Chopped walnuts for the ones who insist breakfast must crunch at least once. For the Sultan, a narrow dish of kaymak sits nearby. Clotted cream that will lean companionably beside yogurt like an old friend at a low stool. Someone sets a tiny spoon across the dish with the solemnity of a bridge. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans learned yogurt from older Anatolian practices or brought a distinct tradition westward from Central Asian steppe life. The word itself carries Turkic roots, but sheep, goat, and cow knew how to become yogurt wherever shepherds watched the sky and needed milk to travel bravely through the day. Perhaps, like most good foods, it met itself halfway. The boy from the fountain enters, cheeks no longer pink but steadied by work. He stands just inside the threshold, looks at the rows of jars, and inhales in a way that makes you think this smell might be his favorite page in the palace's book. The dairy hand gestures him forward to hold the next muslin. 2 hands lift, 2 hands not. There is a small art in tying just tight enough that the whey releases without bitterness. The boy gets it right on the second try. Pride shows itself as a careful nod, not a grin. Another servant appears with shallow, footed glass bowls for the vizier's anteroom, clear vessels that make the yogurt seem colder, whiter, more crystalline. The bowls settle on a silver tray like moons in a measured sky. A line of tiny spoons follows. You notice the pattern: 3 bowls plain, 2 with honey, 1 with mint, then repeat. Symmetry is comfort before decisions. A separate corner of the cellar hums with quiet work. Clay crocks holding lightly salted cucumbers waiting to become a thin morning cassock for the guards who spent the night on the outer walks. Water, yogurt, a pinch of salt, a leaf or 2 of dried mint, pounded garlic and restraint, stirred until the spoon makes a path and the liquid is paler than dawn. Someone tastes from a ladle, frowns thoughtfully, and adds exactly 3 grains of salt. It needed a word, he says. Joke 1 lasts about as long as the grin that meets it, then dissolves in the swirl. Near the staircase, the cellar's ledger sits open on a stand. The dairy clerk dips a reed pen, notes down jars opened, jars reserved, the mayasi, starter culture, refreshed. A parcel of yesterday's yogurt has been set aside in a small lidded bowl like a prized jewel. Tomorrow's batches will begin from this quiet, living thread. He blows gently on the ink as if not to disturb the milk. Quirky tidbit again. To protect the starter from jealous eyes or casual mishaps, some kitchens stored it wrapped in embroidered cloth and tucked into a niche near a calligraphed prayer. For good temper, they said, whether the yogurt's or the cook's was left tastefully ambiguous. The first sesame bag has given enough. It is lifted, untied, and turned gently into a glazed bowl where it sits like a slow cloud. A wooden paddle stirs it with a few careful motions. The surface glosses to a calm lake. For a special tray, a groove is drawn with the back of a spoon and filled with a thread of honey so fine it looks like a line of light. A few crushed pistachios walk across the top as if not to wake it. You imagine the spoon that will arrive later and understand why mornings can mend a person. Historians still argue whether dignitaries took yogurt at dawn for the sake of digestion, for the cool of it before the day's heat, or as an elegant nod to pastoral virtues tucked inside a palace life. Diaries hedge and praise. Physicians recommend moderation and then, delighted by their own advice, ask for seconds. A runner appears at the stair, receives 2 trays, the porcelain bowls and the footed glass, and disappears upward with a care that tightens everyone's shoulders for an instant. Trays come back empty only after rumors do. The dairy hands breathe again when the steps fade. In the quiet that returns, you notice a small bowl set aside with a chopped clove of garlic and a spoon. This is for the master of the guards, who swears by 1 early bite of garlicky yogurt as a charm against cold winds and soft words. Another bowl garnished only with a stripe of sumac belongs to an old scribe whose teeth argue with walnuts, but whose eyes still want the brightness of morning. The kitchen knows these preferences the way a lute knows fingers. Joke 2 wanders in when the tabby reappears, planting itself between 2 trestles as if auditioning to be a jar. A dairy hand, without looking down, says, "That one's the especially furry batch. Needs straining 6 hours." 3 people pretend not to laugh, the cat pretends not to hear, and the world pretends nothing can be improved. From the stairwell above, a faint clatter signals the corridors widening busy, bread to pages, eggs to cups, coffee toward the steward, cream and honey on silks. Here below, your room of white patience continues. Ladle, wipe, place. Lift the next muslin. Write the small numbers that keep the day honest. Someone hums a phrase that sounds like a cradle for spoons. The last jars are opened, and you see the subtle differences. Goat's milk slightly thinner, sheep's richer, cow's the compromise that pleases most palates. The cellar master blends 2 with a practiced hand, just enough to make the texture sigh in unison. He gives the bowl a tiny tap. The surface nods once. "Ready," he says, to no one in particular. The word is a key that turns locks up and down the palace. Before you climb the stairs, the dairy clerk closes the ledger and, with a wry glance at the muslin labeled Morning Quiet, adds in the margin a small ink dot. Not a letter, not a number, just a reminder to himself that today the drip was perfect and the strainers cooperated with the weather. Some records are meant for ledgers, some are meant for memory. You carry the cool of the cellar with you as you rise, cool on the skin, cool on the thought. At the landing, warmth returns, the steam of samovars, the cinnamon breath of a bread basket hovering somewhere near, the pepper-warm hum of eggs in their cups. You touch the banister and feel a faint tack of rosewater on the wood where a careful hand wiped it earlier. Joke 3 greets you at the threshold, when a passing steward, seeing your content face, says, "Careful! Too much serenity at breakfast and the quills go blunt." He winks, and the corridor swallows him in a drift of linen and silver. Ahead, a spice table waits with its little brass scoops and memory-measured pinches, cinnamon, clove, pepper, mint, ready to whisper over bowls and plates. But for a thin moment longer, you hold the taste of yogurt on your tongue, clean, cool, a modest luxury that hums like a low chord beneath the palace's rising song. The spice table is a quiet constellation of color and scent. Small brass bowls line the surface, each paired with its own narrow scoop or long-handled spoon. Even before you get close, the air begins to shift, growing warmer, sharper, richer, as though each spice leans out to greet you. At the far left, cinnamon lies in curled quills and in a mound of reddish-brown powder fine as silk. Next to it, black peppercorns gleam like tiny beads, a few crushed into a coarser grain in a wooden mortar. Cloves sit like dark nails in their bowl, their perfume so strong that it seems to tint the air around them. Between each dish rests a folded scrap of cloth, ready to catch any spill and keep the colors from mingling. Mainstream fact: in the Ottoman palace kitchens, spices were not just for flavor. They were signals of wealth, empire, and care. Many were brought along trade routes from India, Arabia, and beyond, passing through the hands of merchants who knew their worth was measured as much in freshness as in rarity. A senior cook hovers over the table, his movements deliberate. He pinches cinnamon between thumb and forefinger, sprinkling it lightly into a small bowl of warm milk meant for the Sultan's breakfast. Another pinch, black pepper this time, falls into a dish of boiled eggs for a vizier who insists the pepper wakes the mind faster than coffee. Quirky tidbit: some palace cooks measured spices by memory alone, what they called the shadow of the pinch. It wasn't about the weight but the look of the hand, the arc of the fall, and the faint dusting left on the fingertip. Apprentices learned to mimic this, though many joked it took longer to master than writing one's own name. You lean closer and catch a whiff of saffron, thin red threads curled in a shallow porcelain bowl. A cook lifts 3 strands and crushes them into warm water, releasing a golden bloom that spreads through the liquid like slow sunlight. This will be stirred into a small dish of rice pudding reserved for a court official's morning tray. Historians still argue whether such saffron dishes were common or occasional indulgences. Some palace records suggest it appeared daily for certain ranks. Others imply it was reserved for special days or visiting dignitaries. From the other side of the table, a younger cook measures out sumac, its color deep and winey, almost purple. He scatters it over a plate of sliced cucumbers, their green brightened by the sour tang. Another bowl receives a dusting of dried mint, crumbled between the palms so the aroma bursts out just before serving. The donkey from Dionysus's trip would have sneezed here and been banned for life. A small chest beside the table holds the most precious spices, ambergris, musk, and other rarities kept for the most elaborate feasts. This morning, they remain untouched, their drawers closed and sealed with little wax stamps. Even in the palace, excess has its boundaries. One corner of the table holds rock salt, broken into pale, uneven chunks. A servant takes a small hammer to one piece, splitting it into usable shards. Another bowl contains fine salt, sifted through linen to ensure there are no lumps before it touches the Sultan's plate. Quirky tidbit. Some cooks believe the first pinch of salt in the morning should be taken with the left hand to guard against envy. No one could quite explain how it worked, but many did it anyway, glancing over their shoulders as they pinched. The work is nearly silent, just the gentle clink of spoons, the soft tap of mortar against pestle, the whisper of spices hitting their dishes. A servant passes through carrying a tray of eggs toward the marble corridor, pausing to let a final dusting of pepper fall across the yolks before continuing. A steward appears briefly to inspect the table, his gaze sharp but his words minimal. He checks the saffron water, nods once, then disappears toward the Sultan's breakfast chamber. The cook handling the cinnamon exhales in relief, then mutters to his apprentice, "A good nod is worth more than a gold coin." From outside the spice room, the faint sound of pages laughing drifts in, a reminder that the youngest in the palace are already at their own tables. The air here is too rich for play. Every scent has its place, every bowl its owner. As you leave, a final scent clings to you, something between clove and cinnamon, warm and a little mysterious. It follows you into the corridor, mingling with the smell of fresh bread and the faint sweetness of honey you left behind. The breakfast is nearly assembled, though there are still mouths to feed before the palace settles into its mid-morning rhythm. The laughter of the younger attendants leads you toward a long, low room tucked just beyond the main kitchen court. Here, the palace pages, the youngest and often most agile of the household, are gathering for their own breakfast. The air is friendlier than in the formal kitchens, the movements quicker, less rehearsed. A line of simple wooden tables runs down the room, their surfaces worn smooth by years of elbows and plates. The benches creak as the boys settle, some still rubbing the sleep from their eyes, others already chattering about the errands ahead. A pair of older attendants move among them with trays balanced on their palms, setting down plates in a steady rhythm, thick slices of warm bread from the night ovens, small dishes of briny black olives, and wedges of soft white cheese that crumble at the touch of a knife. Mainstream fact: palace pages, known as Isioglandler, were often young boys brought into service through the Devshirme system or as the sons of trusted officials. Their days were long and full of duties, running messages, assisting in ceremonies, or training in literacy and court etiquette. A solid breakfast was considered essential to keeping them sharp and disciplined. The bread is still faintly warm, steam slipping from beneath its crust when broken. The cheese smells of fresh milk, while the olives glisten with the faint sheen of good oil. A few bowls of dried figs are placed at intervals down the table, their sweetness meant to counter the brine. Quirky tidbit: some palace kitchens believe that feeding the pages too richly in the morning would make them lazy in the legs. Whether or not that was true, the pages' breakfast was designed to be simple, sustaining, and quick, nothing to slow the pace of the day. At the far end, a kettle of thin, sweetened tea is poured into earthen cups. The color is light, almost amber, a deliberate choice to avoid overexciting the younger servants with strong brews. The donkey from Dionysus's road trip would have overturned half the cups just to see the commotion. A few of the boys eat silently, conserving their energy, while others trade bites, an olive for a fig, a piece of crust for a corner of cheese. The give and take is wordless but practiced, like a currency all their own. Historians still argue whether pages ate together in this casual fashion every morning or whether some days their meals were taken in shifts, depending on duties. The palace's schedule was a living thing, and the kitchen adjusted to it like a tide point. One boy pauses mid-bite to straighten his belt sash, knowing that at any moment a senior page could call him to fetch something. Another brushes crumbs into his palm and flicks them toward the palace cat, who prowls the edge of the room with expert timing. The cat ignores the bread but sits patiently in case a bit of cheese appears. At one table, a senior attendant corrects a boy's posture with a gentle tap on the shoulder. Eating here is not just about food, it's part of the training. How to sit, how to hold a knife, how to drink without spilling. All of these are rehearsals for the day they might serve in front of higher ranks. Quirky tidbit. Pages sometimes carved small designs into their wooden spoons during quiet moments. A vine, a star, or an initial might decorate the handle. Tiny personal marks on otherwise identical tools. Some of these spoons have been found in palace excavations, their carvings still visible centuries later. As the plate's empty, the boys rise in small groups, taking their dishes to a side table where another attendant stacks them for washing. Those with early errands slip out into the corridors, their steps quickening as they disappear into the hum of the palace. The room grows quieter as the last few finish their tea. A single shaft of light from a high window catches the curve of a fig on the table, making it look like a jewel. The attendant clears it away, and just like that, the page's breakfast is over, swift, simple, and gone, leaving only the faint smell of olives in the air. From the page's hall, you follow the lingering smell of olives and warm bread into a narrower passage where the light falls in thin ribbons through high, arched windows. The corridor leads to a space reserved for the harem magallari, the eunuch servants who managed and guarded the imperial harem. Their breakfast is quieter still, almost ceremonial, a pause before a day of constant watchfulness. The room itself is modest by palace standards, thick carpets underfoot, low tables edged with inlaid mother-of-pearl, and walls painted in calm shades of blue and cream. Cushions are set along the sides, and each place is marked by a folded linen napkin and a shallow brass tray. Mainstream fact: the chief eunuchs of the Ottoman court held immense influence, often acting as intermediaries between the Sultan and the outside world. Their duties were numerous, and their presence was constant. A private breakfast allowed them to prepare in peace before stepping into the complex politics of the day. 2 Servants in pale tunics moved silently among the cushions, setting down plates of soft white cheese drizzled with olive oil, small bowls of almonds and hazelnuts, and rounds of sesame bread no larger than a handspan. A larger dish of fresh dates sits in the center of the table, the fruit split open just enough to reveal the glossy seeds within. Quirky tidbit: some harem eunuchs were known to eat exactly 7 dates each morning, believing the number kept both the body and the mind in harmony. Whether it was health advice, superstition, or simply habit, no one seemed inclined to challenge it. The tea served here is darker than the page's brew, rich and fragrant, poured into small tulip-shaped glasses that fit neatly in the palm. A single stick of cinnamon rests in the pot, releasing its scent gradually as the tea cools. 1 Eunuch, older and broad-shouldered, breaks a piece of sesame bread and uses it to scoop up cheese. He chews slowly, his eyes fixed on the far wall, though you can sense his thoughts are already in the day ahead. Who will be allowed to enter the harem? Which letters will be delivered? Which disputes will require his voice? Historians still argue whether the eunuch's breakfast came from the same kitchens as the rest of the palace or from a smaller, dedicated kitchen attached to their quarters. The answer may be both, depending on rank and occasion. In one corner, a younger eunuch rolls each almond between his fingers before eating it, as though testing for some invisible flaw. Another takes a sip of tea, then swirls the glass gently before setting it back on its saucer without a sound. Even in these private moments, their movements are restrained, shaped by years of service in spaces where composure was currency. Quirky tidbit: a few eunuchs kept small pouches of crushed mastic gum at their belts, chewing it after breakfast to freshen the breath. It also, according to them, made the voice steady, which was essential for delivering messages without a tremor. A brass clock in the corner ticks softly, each second stretching longer than it should. The meal is unhurried, but it will end without warning. A knock at the door, a quiet summons, a sudden shift from stillness to duty. For now, they eat in a rhythm that has no excess and no waste. Bread is broken, not cut. Cheese is served in modest slices. Dates are eaten one by one, the pits set neatly in a small silver dish at the table's edge. As the trays are cleared, the room remains hushed. The eunuchs rise almost as one, each smoothing the folds of his robe before stepping back into the corridor's pale light. The scent of cinnamon tea lingers in the air, a reminder that even in the heart of the palace, some mornings begin with discipline more than indulgence. The corridor gathers you like a river gathers light. You step from the snug rooms of ovens and kettles into a long run of marble where the morning has learned to walk in straight lines. The floor is cool and veined, a map of pale streams running beneath your sandals. The walls hold framed tiles the color of clear sky and spring leaves. High, arched windows filter the day into slender rectangles that lie across the passage like folded linen. Every sound lengthens here. Tray feet tap once and echo twice. A spoon touches brass and becomes a bell in a small, polite canyon. Ahead, the first of the breakfast processions moves out. Trays ride on steady palms. Broad, flat scenery of hammered copper and silver, edges rolled like calm waves. Linen napkins, fresh, faintly rose-scented, are folded in precise fans at the tray's corners. Bowls sit in paired symmetries that would please a mathematician. The carriers breathe to a count, in on the left foot, out on the right, so the rhythm anchors the weight. A steward at the door lifts a finger, go, and the procession glides. Mainstream fact, in top copy, service to the inner courts followed fixed routes, with designated doors, turns, and waiting niches. Meals left the kitchens as a series of small, timed processions, pages to pages hall, eunuchs to the harem quarters, stewards to the divan officers, and a final, most formal path toward the Sultan's breakfast room. Trays were often borne chest high, steadying with the thumb against the rim to hush vibration on marble floors. You fall in behind a pair of carriers whose trays gleam with egg cups and little bowls of yogurt drawn smooth as calm lakes. The rule here is simple and absolute: feet quiet, elbows owned, eyes forward except at thresholds. A soft-voiced marshal, sash knotted in crimson, keeps time with a near-inaudible click of tongue, not a scold, just a metronome people respect. Quirky tidbit: some carriers smear a whisper of beeswax on their fingertips before a difficult run. It's not sticky, only certain, a trick handed down with a wink and a promise never to drop a saucer to the judgment of marble. Another superstition insists you should never step squarely on the seam where two stones meet. Trays listen for cracks. You notice the veterans drift just to one side of every join, out of habit or respect. The corridor widens into a small chamber where lattice screens, caifs, cast gold-tinted patterns over everything. A pair of narrow doors stands closed, each with a tasseled curtain. 2 taps on wood, a heartbeat of patience, and the right-hand door opens enough for one tray at a time. The first carrier steps through, the curtain falls, the second follows. Behind the screen, voices ripple and hush. Your turn will come, but not yet. You're bound for another wing, a long gallery that runs like a gentle breeze between gardens. On the way you pass a niche where a boy stands with a brass kettle and a stack of warm cloths. Every returning carrier pauses, palms the steam for an instant, and swipes tray rims to erase the fingerprints that marble can summon from even the calmest hands. The boy works like a punctuation mark between sentences, comma, comma, semicolon, ordering the flow without being noticed. He flashes you a quick grin. It is returned with a quick coin of thanks later, when someone remembers pockets. Historians still argue whether these traffic rules of the corridor were codified in the palace canon, administrative law, or grew as an oral map enforced by stewards with long memories. There are fragments and registers, but mostly the palace remembers through feet, where you walk, where you wait, where you never pass because that path belongs to someone else's. Morning. Ata turning, the light thickens. A garden leans close through open windows, cypress vertical as vows, plane trees old enough to have opinions. The breeze carries a hush of leaves, and from far off, a muezzin's call pressed thin by distance. A carrier ahead of you shifts the tray minutely to let the sound pass. Joke one rides your tongue. The corridor has better acoustics than a musician's dream, and the trays are singing in a key called breakfast minor. You keep the joke in your pocket, because laughing with a tray is like laughing with a cat, possible, but inadvisable. A palace cat, incidentally, materializes from nowhere and walks the baseboard like a tightrope, tail high, eyes amber as honey jars. It inspects your procession, chooses not to trip anyone, a professional courtesy, and vanishes into a wedge of sun. Somewhere a boy will swear the cat approved his posture. You turn into a colder hall, its marble the shade of milk cooled in moonlight. Here the ceiling rises and swallows sound, so steps must be smaller. Even a careful foot can become a drum in this room. A steward's palm drops, the pace slows, and breath shortens to match. Egg spoons gleam like small sickles. The yogurt bowls hold their lakes. You become aware, suddenly, of the invisible choreography of doors. One opens, one waits, one never opens for anyone below a certain rank unless a day has gone strangely. The palace is a machine built of grace and hinges. Quirky tidbit. One old steward keeps a token, carved olive pit. He rubs twice before any tray passes the threshold to the sultan's rooms. For luck, he admits. For timing, says his assistant. For remembering which foot to start with, mutters the carrier who always forgets. Today the olive pit is busy. The assistant swears timing, and the foot starts right. At the mouth of the imperial gallery a small bell sounds, not a summons, merely a notice. Stand ready, turn eyes down, let the air compose itself. The leading tray slides away through gilt doors. You glimpse a flash of silk cushion, an inlay of mother of pearl catching morning like a secret. The door closes. The next tray waits in the hush that follows important hinges. You feel the house inhale, then exhale. Mainstream fact, again and smaller. Carriers trained on low stools in an empty hall, balancing trays loaded with smooth river stones before they ever saw a bowl of honey. The stones taught steadiness without heartbreak. Only when a steward could push the trainee's shoulder and the tray did not quarrel with gravity was the promotion signed with a real plate. Back along your route, you peel off for the wing where divan officers take their more modest breakfast. The doors here are plainer, the carpets thicker. Sound is a courteous guest that never overstays. A clerk with ink-black fingertips opens with a nod. Your trays bowls find their rectangles on a low table, bread fanned, cheese quiet under a veiled napkin, yogurt in measured crescents, olives glossy, a single wedge of quince jelly placed like a period at the end of a polite sentence. The clerk says sag olin under his breath to whoever will hear it. You hear it. The door closes without complaint. On the return, empty trays ride higher, lighter, sometimes with a discreet coin under a napkin, sometimes with only the clean ring of copper as reward. In the niche, the brass kettle steams the last fingerprints back to myth. The boy with cloth stands on one leg to rest the other and does not spill a single drop. Somewhere a senior cook will remember to send him a figure. You pass a window where the morning has become specific. Birds arguing over cypress. A gardener bending into parsley. The faint wet shoe of broom straw across stone. A tray overtakes you, then yields the inside turn. There is a murmured by urine. After you, that has more oil than any olive in it. Joke 2 turns up like an obedient page. The corridor has right-of-way rules stricter than a harbor, and the penalties for collision are mainly sorrow and extra polishing. No one collides. Historians still argue whether the palace moved more on wheels or on arms. Carts whispered over carpets in outer courts, human chains within. The answer this morning is arms. You realize you've memorized the height of door lintels by heart, and the grain of marble by ankle. No map would show it, But the route now lives in your knees. At the last bend before the kitchens, a sudden draft carries the ghost of cinnamon tea from the eunuch's room and the green breath of mint from the yogurt cellar. The smells stack like pages, and somewhere between them the faint, faithful perfume of hot metal tells you the coffee hearth is still writing its quiet paragraphs. That a final door opens to the kitchen court. The noise returns in its low register, pans rinsed in basins, knives conversing with boards, voices keeping courteous company. Trays are set on stands, rims are wiped. A steward initials a slate with a brief flourish that means on time, which is the palace's second favorite blessing after enough. Quirky tidbit. Last for this corridor, some carriers tuck a folded scrap of paper under their sashes, a list of regulars and their small preferences. Cinnamon pinch for the vizier with the winter cough. Olives at the outer edge for the clerk who doesn't like their oil near bread. One extra date, always 7 for the tall aga. The lists change like days, and then they don't. Joke 3 arrives as you cross the court, and a scullion, seeing your careful face, whispers, "If you walk any softer, the marble will think you're a rumor." You answer with a smile that belongs to someone who has just delivered lakes that did not ripple and eggs that did not sulk. The river of corridor light narrows back to kitchen brightness. You surrender your empty tray, flex your hands, and feel the press of the rim echo in your thumb like a small, satisfied memory. Another procession is already forming, silver, linen, yoke, and the marshal's quiet metronome begins again. The palace keeps time with breath and hinges, and you have learned to breathe with it. The Sultan's breakfast room lies at the end of the most guarded path in the palace, where doors are as much ceremony as they are wood. You arrive just as the final preparations are underway, the air thick with a quiet that is not absence of sound but its careful folding. The room itself is more intimate than you imagined, not a banquet hall, but a private chamber that smells faintly of polished wood, rosewater, and something sweet drifting in from the tray stands. Gold inlay runs along the low tables, curling into patterns of tulips and vines. Silk cushions, arranged in deliberate asymmetry, are dyed in deep saffron and pale azure, colors that seem to warm and cool the space at once. The floor is covered with carpets so soft that your steps feel like they've been erased before they've fully happened. Mainstream fact: in Topkapi and other imperial residences, the Sultan's private breakfast was often served in a smaller, secluded chamber, a place designed not to impress large audiences but to please the Sultan himself, with every texture and color chosen for comfort and symbolism. Against one wall stands a low brass stand holding a silver coffee set, its spouts and handles shaped into delicate curves. On another, a porcelain bowl brimming with dates rests beside a shallow dish of pistachios. A single carafe of sherbet, pale amber, scented with rose and lemon, catches the light like a jewel in a window. Quirky tidbit: some sultans were known to start their day with a single spoonful of quince jam before anything else, believing it sweetened the tongue for speech. Whether it was for eloquence or just habit, the small jar always appeared on the breakfast table, even on days when it went untouched. A chief steward glides into the room, moving as if the air itself parts for him. He checks each plate, the honey dish perfectly centered, the yogurt smoothed into its bowl, the bread sliced at an exact angle. He adjusts the placement of a single fig by less than a finger's width, then nods in quiet satisfaction. Historians still argue whether the Sultan ate alone in this chamber every morning or sometimes invited favorite advisors or family members to join him. Diaries hint at both, but the kitchen protocol treated every morning as if a guest might be present, perfection with no audience but the Sultan himself. The marble doors to the inner passage remain closed. Servants wait along the edge of the room, standing just inside the threshold so that the moment the steward signals, the trays can be advanced. One man holds a brass water jug and a small basin for the Sultan to wash his hands before eating. Another carries a folded linen towel as soft as cloud. Quirky tidbit: In some rains, the hand-washing water was infused with orange blossom or clove, not just for cleanliness but for the calming scent that marked the start of the day. Outside the chamber, a faint shuffle of footsteps signals the approach. The room stills further, which you would not have thought possible. Even the cat, who has somehow followed you this far, tucks its paws under itself and pretends to be a decorative cushion. The steward lifts his hand. Two carriers glide forward, trays steady, eyes down. They set them onto the low tables without so much as a chime from silver on porcelain. The air smells now of honey and saffron, yogurt, and warm bread. The sherbet's rosewater note rides above it all like a high, sweet string. You do not see the Sultan enter. Your place in this room is not for looking. But you hear the faint rustle of robes, the almost silent settling onto cushions. There is a pause, and then the soft sound of a spoon touching the edge of a bowl. That is the day's real beginning. Joke one stirs in your head, somewhere. 100 people worked before dawn so a single fig could sit at precisely the right angle. But you do not let it leave your lips. The quiet here is complete, and even thoughts feel too loud. A low-voiced attendant offers the coffee. Another pours sherbet into a slender glass. The scents mingle for a moment, bitter roast, floral sweetness, and then drift into their own corners of the room. From beyond the silk curtain, you hear a pigeon cooing in the outer courtyard. The sound is ordinary, yet in this chamber it feels as arranged as the gold inlay on the tables. The trays will be cleared soon, carried away with the same precision they arrived, but for now the breakfast remains untouched by haste. The palace moves around it like water around a stone, slow, deliberate, certain. Joke 2 slips through anyway. You wonder if the cat will be promoted to official taster by the end of the week. The steward's hand lifts again, signaling a final check before the inner doors close. You step back toward the threshold, feeling the air cool slightly as the marble turns you away. Behind you, the Sultan's breakfast continues, a private, silent ritual that anchors the rest of the palace's morning. When you return to the kitchens, the air feels louder, not in volume, but in texture. Here, the hum of the palace loosens into clatters and hisses, the sigh of fire under copper, the rush of water into basins. Breakfast for the highest ranks is nearly finished, but for the rest of the palace, guards, gardeners, scribes, laundry hands, the morning meal is just hitting its stride. A broad marble counter near the outer court is crowded with baskets of flatbread, their surfaces spotted golden from the griddle. The smell is rich, warm, and faintly nutty. Beside them, a heap of boiled eggs sits in a wooden bowl, shells cracked in neat rings so the tops can be lifted clean. Mainstream fact: the Ottoman palace fed hundreds of people each day, from elite court officials to the humblest stable hand. While rank determined the ingredients, the rhythm of service meant that hot bread and fresh eggs were a near universal comfort. The taste of morning across the palace's social layers. A line forms at the counter. A gardener in a tunic faded by sun, a laundry woman with sleeves rolled to the elbow, a clerk still carrying his ink-stained ledger under one arm. Each takes bread, an egg or two, and a small scoop of olives from a ceramic jar. The olives are glossy black, brined with lemon peel. The scent cuts pleasantly through the warmth of the bread. Quirky tidbit: in the gardens, it was believed that eating olives before speaking a word in the morning would ensure quiet plants for the day, fewer pests, fewer accidents. Some gardeners swore by it. Others just enjoyed an excuse for silence before dawn. At one end of the counter, a boy stirs a cauldron of lentil soup, its surface trembling as he ladles portions into small wooden bowls. The soup is pale gold, thickened with onion and a hint of cumin. A handful of chopped parsley floats on top of each serving, green against the steam. A guard takes his portion, blows on it twice, and eats without waiting for it to cool. Another guard joins him, tearing bread into the soup. Their armor clinks softly each time they move, a reminder that the palace's safety is always on duty, even at breakfast. Historians still argue whether these communal breakfasts were officially scheduled or simply allowed to form naturally as duties eased in the morning. The palace archives mention rations, but the scenes here feel more like habit than law. Further down the line, a pair of scribes lean over their bowls, speaking in low voices about something that sounds like poetry but could just as easily be bookkeeping. One gestures with a piece of bread, accidentally flinging a crumb that the palace cat, yes, somehow here again, catches midair. Quirky tidbit: palace cats were unofficial but tolerated breakfast companions, especially in outer courts. They were believed to bring luck if they ate beside you, though most seemed more interested in your bread than your fortune. The bread baskets empty quickly, and a new stack arrives, carried on a flat wooden peel straight from the ovens. The loaves crackle faintly as they cool, the sound almost lost in the hum of voices. Somewhere near the soup cauldron, a woman laughs, a short, warm burst, at something the boy with the ladle has said. Joke one comes to mind: the palace might have 100 rules for serving the sultan, but the rule here is simple: hold your bowl steady, don't block the bread. The line shortens, but the scent of lentils and olives lingers, mingling with the faint sweetness of tea brewing in the corner. A man in a patched tunic pours himself a cup, adds a single sugar cube, and slips away toward the gardens without a word. By the time the sun has risen fully, the counter is quiet again. The last loaf has been torn, the final ladle of soup scraped from the cauldron. The cat sits on the empty bread basket, licking its paw in triumph. Joke too is obvious: if the Sultan ever wanted a true pulse of his palace, he'd skip the golden laid tables and come stand by the bread. The boy with the ladle rinses the cauldron, the sound of water against copper ringing like a bell. The air cools slightly as the ovens dim. Breakfast for the workers is over, and the palace turns its face toward the day's other appetites. The courtyard between the kitchens and the laundry wing is already alive with small movements when you step outside. Morning sunlight is pooling on the worn paving stones, catching in the brass of door hinges and the copper rims of water basins. And padding through it all, like he owns every sunbeam, comes the palace cat. He's a thick, marmalade fellow today. You swear it's the same cat you saw in the Sultan's breakfast room earlier, though logic says that's impossible. His tail curves high, curling at the tip as he makes his rounds with deliberate steps. Each cook, each gardener, each scullion gets a moment of inspection. Mainstream fact: cats were not only tolerated in Ottoman palaces but welcomed for their practical service as pest control. Their presence in kitchens and storerooms kept grain and dried goods safe from rodents, but over time, they became small fixtures of the palace's social life. The cat pauses by a bench where two junior cooks are sitting with bowls of yogurt. He blinks slowly, the way only cats can, and one of the cooks obliges with a spoonful of cream scraped from the top. The cat eats without hurry, then moves on as though to say, "You have done your duty, carry on." Quirky tidbit: some palace staff swore certain cats could predict who was about to receive a promotion. If a cat sat beside you during breakfast, you'd be called to the steward's office within the week. No one could prove it, but plenty remembered to set a little extra cheese aside, just in case. The marmalade cat pads toward the bread racks, where a baker is trimming loaves for the day's later meals. The baker pretends not to notice until a paw reaches up and hooks the corner of a crust. "Thief!" the baker murmurs, but his smile softens the word. A small piece is torn off and dropped to the stones, where it vanishes in a neat bite. Historians still argue whether the palace's fondness for cats was born purely of necessity, or whether it carried a symbolic weight. In some Islamic traditions, cats were considered ritually clean, and stories of the Prophet's kindness to them may have helped secure their status here. From the bread racks, the cat slips toward a low stool where an old steward sits with his tea. Without a word, the cat hops up beside him and leans gently against his knee. The steward reaches down and scratches under the chin, the kind of absent-minded gesture that speaks of years of shared mornings. Quirky tidbit: The kitchens kept no official record of which cats lived on the grounds, but some cooks named them anyway, often after ingredients. You hear one boy call this one Zensville, Ginger, which fits the fur, and, judging by the cat's confident air, his sense of self-importance, a small group of guards passes through the courtyard on their way to the gates. The cat pauses to watch them, tail flicking. One of the younger guards bends, taps a finger under the chin, and is rewarded with a headbutt. "You'll be Sultan next," the guard jokes, earning a laugh from the others. Joke 1. If cats really did run the palace, breakfast service might be nothing but fish and cream, and trays would only be carried when the cat felt like supervising. The sun shifts higher, the shadows shrinking to the bases of the walls. The cat makes one last stop at the door of the spice room, where a strong whiff of cinnamon drifts out. He sniffs, sneezes once, and turns away with a flick of the tail, a clear verdict. Too strong for this hour. Eventually, Zensville disappears through a gap in the laundry door, no doubt to patrol the warm linen piles. The courtyard feels a little emptier without him, though the warmth he's left seems to linger in the paving stones. Joke 2. You suspect the cat will have eaten 6 breakfasts by the end of the day, all without lifting a paw to wash a single dish. Somewhere in the kitchens, a cook calls for more bread, and the clatter of trays begins again. The courtyard, however, returns to its measured rhythm: sunlight, footsteps, and the faint, phantom sound of a purr. By mid-morning the palace has eaten, now it must exhale. You follow the rattle and hush of empty vessels to the washing court, a bright rectangle of stone set just off the main kitchen yard. Sunlight pools there like warm water, and into that light servants carry the day's used things: bowls filled with yogurt, egg cups ringed in gold yolk, copper pans whose insides glow like small sunsets under a veil of steam. At the court's edge, a line of low stone basins receives the first rush. Water arcs from spouts into the troughs, slapping the surface with a sound that feels as clean as it is loud. A long table beside the basins holds brushes of palm fiber, linen cloths, and dishes of ash and fine river sand, the old, humble alchemy that turns dull metal honest again. You take your place along the wall, where shadows hang in strips and the air smells of wet stone, lemon, and hot copper. Mainstream fact: Ottoman palace kitchens prize copper for its even heat, but bare copper reacts with food. Vessels were tinned inside kalali, and washed carefully between uses. Ash, sand, and sliced lemon worked as mild abrasives. Hard scouring was forbidden lest it thin the tin lining. Periodically, pans went to court-approved kalasi, tinners, to refresh the bright protective skin. A senior washer sets the rhythm. He submerges a pan, turns it slowly once as if teaching it to float, then draws it out so water streams from the lip like silk. With 2 fingers he rubs a paste of ash and lemon over the rim, moving in circles small enough to be patient and large enough to be useful. The tin underneath catches the sun in quick, bright winks. A junior follows, rinsing with a gentle sweep that leaves no grit. To one side, a row of wooden pegs bites a beam. From each peg hangs a cloth ready to become the next clean gesture. Quirky tidbit: some washers wet a cloth with rosewater for the very last swipe on anything bound for the inner apartments, not to perfume the food, but to give the metal a whisper of courtesy. So the tray announces itself politely. One explains, flicking a droplet from the cloth's edge like a bow. You notice the routes each object takes. Porcelain is washed in a separate basin with soft water drawn earlier from the fountain. No sand, no ash, only a breath of soap made from olive oil and a promise not to chip. Silver sits in a quiet queue. A steward watches that line himself, as if silver could gossip if left alone among copper. Wooden spoons and bread paddles get their own corner too, scalded, never soaked, then stood in the sun until their shadows shrink. Historians still argue whether the palace kept permanent tinners within the kitchen staff or contracted guild artisans to come inside on appointment. Payrolls show both patterns across the centuries. Looking at the disciplined way each pan is handled today, you suspect the kitchen could keep its vessels bright for a long while before sending them off to be reborn. A boy arrives hugging a stack of egg cups, each with a ring of yellow clinging like a memory. He tips them into a shallow basin where warm water and a finger's worth of salt wait. Beside him, a woman with forearms as strong as door lintels works a row of brass ladles, her hands moving in confident pairs, dip, sweep, twist, hang. When a drop hesitates on a ladle's lip, she taps the wood beam with it twice. Not necessary, only satisfying. Joke 1 comes from a gray-bearded washer who watches you eye the sparkling stack. We wash until the pans can see their mistakes, he says, dead serious for half a heartbeat before his mouth betrays him. The laughter is brief and kind. The pans shine harder, either in pride or coincidence. A steward chalks marks on a slate: porcelain returned, copper counted, breakage none. Today. He listens to each basin the way a baker listens to dough, judging when the water is tired. At his nod, a scullion pulls a plug and the basin sighs. Fresh water shoulders in, brighter, cooler, interested. A wedge of lemon spends itself to the rind and is tossed toward a small pile where peels wait to become fire starters. Nothing dies here. It keeps changing jobs. Mainstream fact again, the sun does part of the work. Clean vessels are set on angled racks along the wall so heat and light dry them fast. Standing water encourages tarnish, and tarnish invites scrubbing, and scrubbing shortens the life of tin. Sunlight is the quietest servant, cheap, tireless, persnickety about clouds. A cat, Zensville, surely, appears with the authority of a foreman, steps between two puddles without looking, and inspects the drying racks. He sniffs a ladle, approves a bowl, and sits squarely in the path of anyone foolish enough to walk without checking. A junior washer deters around him without breaking rhythm. Inspector prefers a clear view, someone murmurs. Joke 2 gets a ripple of conspiratorial grins. At the far end of the court, a man works a bellows beneath a brazier. Above it, a shallow pan of beeswax and tallow melts to a pale glaze. Every third morning, the rims of big serving trays receive a kiss of this mixture, just the barest smear, then a cloth polishes it invisible. The wax protects in a way you can't see. It smells faintly of honey and sheep, hair and field. It smells like safety disguised as shine. Quirky tidbit again. Washers swear by silence when cleaning porcelain bound for the Sultan. No joking, no singing. So the bowls remember calm. The rule is not written anywhere you've seen, but you can feel how it works. The quiet becomes a kind of polish itself, filling the room with the sense that hands, eyes, and breath are all engaged in the same single job. A dispute curls up from the corner where two men rinse a great copper cauldron. One insists the rinse should flow clockwise to match the sun's path. The other says the direction doesn't matter, only the care. The steward raises an eyebrow. The cauldron gets both directions thoroughly. Historians still argue whether such motions, clockwise ladling, right-hand turning, were codified custom or just kitchen superstition that fossilized into habit. Today the cauldron gleams either way and pretends not to have a preference. Along the wall, a wooden frame cradles a sheet of linen strung taut as a drum. Wash spoons and small knives are laid on it edgewise. Water, tempted by gravity, falls through the weave instead of pooling around the metal. You run a finger beneath and feel the cold drops stitch your skin, tidy, precise, unhurried. Joke 3 slides in on a gust of steam as the gray-bearded washer lifts a pan to the light and declares, "If I can see my nap in it, it's done." Someone answers, "Then nothing in this court is clean." And even the steward's mouth permits a corner to bend. Near the basins, a girl works the sand across a tray with the patient figure eights of a scribe tracing letters. Her palms are red but sure. When she's done, she rinses with a two-handed pour so even that the last beads depart in a single line. She sets the tray on the rack and reaches for another without looking. The movement is artless only in the sense that it has become entirely art. You learn the sequence by watching: scrape, never scrape tin; soak, soap where allowed; ash for copper; sand for stubbornness; lemon for pride; rinse once for clean, twice for clarity, thrice if it meets silk. Then sun, then cloth, then a last glance up close enough to fog the metal, and a wipe to make sure you didn't dot. A runner arrives carrying a dented little pot the color of regret. He looks young enough to still be surprised by consequences. The steward weighs it in his hand, thumb finding the bruise. "Edge," he says. "Not use, carry. Don't knock the thresholds." The runner nods, chastened but relieved. The pot will live. A washer whispers to you. Copper forgives until it doesn't. Like people and bread. Mainstream fact, practical and plain. Broken ware went to the palace amber store, to be tallied and, if possible, repaired. Beyond saving, it was melted and reborn. Metal traveled in circles here as stubborn and dependable as the sun over the court. You look up. The shadows have slid a handspan across the paving. Basins empty and refill. Racks surrender their shining cargo to runners who carry it back to quiet shelves and cool rooms. The sun keeps its gentle audit. The court smells less of egg now and more of lemon and metal that has remembered its better self. Before you go, the gray-bearded washer palms you a trick, a thumbprint of ash under the nail to find any last grease by feel, not sight. "Eyes brag," he says. "Fingers tell the truth." He rinses his hands clean a heartbeat later. Truth shouldn't stain. You step back through the arch, leaving behind the language of water on stone and the persuasion of cloth against copper. The kitchens gather their shine to themselves and settle, ready to become busy again the moment someone thinks the word lunch. A breeze lifts and dries the last beads from your sleeve. Somewhere nearby, the fountain laughs at the basins for trying to be fountains. The basins keep working anyway. By the time the last tray has been dried and shelved, the palace kitchens begin their quiet mid-morning ritual, the preparation of the kebasizi, the tea garden service, for the higher servants and favored officials. It's not the grand coffee ceremony of the Sultan, nor the bustling bread line of the gardeners, but a liminal hour of warm porcelain, murmured conversation, and gentle clinks of saucers that sound like punctuation to the morning. The tea garden sits in a sheltered courtyard fringed with pomegranate trees, their leaves still glossy with dew. A low stone wall encloses the space, and in one corner, a carved marble fountain trickles steadily, the sound threading through the soft rustle of leaves overhead. On the garden's outer edge, a long wooden table serves as the staging ground. Small copper kettles, darkened at the base from many mornings over coals, sit beside trays of clear glasses and porcelain cups, some simple, some with a thin rim of gold. Mainstream fact: while coffee held ceremonial prestige in the Ottoman court, tea began to appear more widely in the 19th century, particularly in the palace's private spaces. Before that, sherbets and herbal infusions, sage, mint, chamomile, were the morning drinks for many servants. By the late Ottoman period, tea gardens and palace courtyards became favored places for informal refreshment. An older steward, wearing a sash faded from crimson to rose, tests the water temperature in the largest kettle by dipping a sliver of wood into it. The steam wreathes his hands as he lifts the kettle onto a low brazier. A younger page scatters dried mint leaves into a porcelain teapot, their sharp, green scent leaping immediately into the air. Quirky tidbit: some palace staff swore that tea brewed in a pot that had heard the morning call to prayer would taste sweeter. Whether from timing or superstition, you notice that the steward doesn't begin pouring until the muezzin's voice from the distant mosque fades into the pomegranate leaves. The first cups are poured light and clear, the mint's color just touching the water. Servants take them in both hands, inhaling before they sip, as if they are drinking scent as much as liquid. A gardener in a saffron tunic cradles his cup like a chick, blowing softly at the steam before tipping it toward his lips. Historians still argue whether the tea garden was officially sanctioned as part of the servant's schedule or simply tolerated as long as duties were kept. The absence of records may be the best evidence that it was a quietly understood right rather than a granted privilege. The air in the garden is calm but not still. Pages move between the kettles and the seated groups, replenishing cups before they're empty. A boy with a tray of honeyed figs offers them first to the oldest present, who accepts one with a nod, then passes the tray along without speaking. Joke one stirs as you notice a pair of guards, still in partial armor, sitting across from each other with cups so small in their large hands they look like toys. One raises his pinky exaggeratedly as he sips, earning a slow grin from the other. Eye in one corner. A pair of women from the laundry rest their elbows on the stone wall, cups steaming between them. Their conversation rises and falls in gentle hums, broken only by the occasional splash from the fountain. They glance toward the pomegranate trees now and then, perhaps checking the fruit's ripeness. Quirky tidbit: some believe that if you drank tea under a pomegranate tree before the fruit split open in the autumn, you would be spared headaches all winter. Whether or not it's true, no one here seems inclined to skip the chance that a white cat, not Zensville this time, but smaller, with one torn ear, appears at the garden's edge. It hops onto the fountain rim and laps at the water without hesitation, tail flicking in time with each sip. The gardeners ignore it. The laundry women smile. The guards pretend not to see it, lest they be caught enjoying something not strictly in their job description. Joke too writes itself. With this many cats in the palace, you half expect them to start their own tea circle, complete with tiny cups and impossible etiquette. The steward moves among the kettles, topping up coals with a long-handled shovel. The scent of hot metal, mint, and faint honey hangs together like a well-balanced chord. He pauses to taste from one pot, then nods, satisfied. The groups in the garden linger, cups held in idle hands, conversation winding slower than the steam rising from the tea. Duties are waiting, trays to polish, records to check, rooms to sweep, but for now the pace is gentle. Even the fountain seems to lower its voice, the water slipping more softly over the marble lip. Historians still argue whether moments like this, small, unrecorded, unremarkable, shaped the palace's inner life more than the grand feasts and processions. You suspect they did? Here, the hierarchies soften. Here, the servants are simply people sharing warmth in a cup. Joke 3 lingers as you set down your empty glass. The tea garden might not appear in the palace archives, but you wouldn't be surprised if the cats kept their own meticulous records. The steward clears his throat, not to hurry anyone, but to signal the end of this breathing space. Cups are drained, trays are gathered. One last sip, one last glance at the pomegranate leaves trembling in the breeze, and the tea garden dissolves back into the palace, its warmth carried in the steps of those returning to work. By the time the sun tips toward midday, the kitchens have shifted again, like a tide pulling away from the shore. Breakfast for the inner court is long finished, the trays wiped down and tallied, the kettles cooling in their basins. But the food that hasn't graced the Sultan's table, or the senior officials, or the pages, is not destined for waste. There is a final journey yet, one that carries it out to the Byron, the outer court of the palace, where guards, messengers, and laborers keep their own version of the empire running. At the far end of the kitchen yard, a pair of tall gates stand open, leading toward a cobbled lane edged with low storehouses. Here, large wooden platters are being loaded with the remains of the morning's bounty. Not scraps. The palace doesn't deal in scraps, but perfectly serviceable bread rounds, bowls of yogurt still cool to the touch, a dish of honey where the spoon has barely left a trail. Mainstream fact: in the Ottoman court, redistribution of food was part of a carefully managed system. Leftovers from the inner palace often went to feed the Byron staff, soldiers, gatekeepers, stable hands. in what was both a practical measure and a subtle reinforcement of loyalty. It kept everyone fed, but also reminded them of the bounty and order that flowed from the Sultan's household. Two kitchen porters move in rhythm, stacking bread into wicker baskets lined with linen cloths. A steward stands beside them with a wax tablet, marking what goes out. Beside him, a boy carries a shallow copper tray of dates, their skins glossy under the light, the fruit soft from the morning's warmth. Quirky tidbit, some guards swore that dates from the second table, meaning the leftovers of the inner court, gave them sharper eyes on patrol. Whether it was the sugar or the story, the dates always vanished first. You follow as the procession moves toward the outer court. The cobblestones are uneven here, worn by centuries of boots. Along the way, workers glance up from their tasks, a man mending a leather saddle strap, two boys sweeping leaves from the gate, and their faces brighten just slightly at the sight of the baskets. At a long trestle table beneath an open awning, the food is set out. There's no formality here, just a slow, steady queue of men and women stepping forward with bowls, cups, or simply their hands cupped together. Bread is broken, yogurt spooned, honey dripped onto the flat of a palm and licked away before it can drip. Historians still argue whether this distribution was seen as a rite of service or a generous gift. The records suggest both. Official ration lists exist, but so do accounts of surprise deliveries from the kitchens, perhaps on the steward's whim, or in honor of a holy day. The air here is different from the inner courts, brisker, touched with the smell of horses from the nearby stables, and the faint tang of tar from the repair sheds. The food seems to carry the scent of the kitchens with it, a warm, spiced echo that softens the edges of the outer courts. Worked out, a guard in a tall felt cap tears his bread and offers half to the boy behind him. The boy accepts with a grin, yogurt already on his lip from an earlier spoonful. Two women from the laundry arrive late, still smelling faintly of soap, and are handed bread and a small bowl of honey each. Joke one comes to you watching a stable hand carefully dip a piece of bread into yogurt, then honey, then take such a tiny bite you'd think he was at the Sultan's table. Quirky tidbit. A superstition in the outer court held that if you dropped a piece of bread during these distributions, you had to kiss it before picking it up, then place it on a high ledge for the birds. You watch a man do exactly this, without looking embarrassed, before returning to his place in line. Once the platters begin to empty, the baskets are folded and stacked, the copper trays wiped with cloths. Any bread still left is tied in cloth bundles for the messengers, who will take it further, to the palace's gardeners working on distant grounds, to the boatmen at the river landing, perhaps even to the small guardhouses at the city walls. Historians still argue whether this final dispersal was tracked or left to trust. The absence of thorough records may mean it simply worked. Food went where it was needed, and those who carried it knew the unspoken rules. Joke 2 slips in as you watch the last dates vanish. The guards may claim the fruit sharpens their eyes, but it seems to work fastest on the ones who spot it before anyone else. As the baskets are carried away, the outer court resumes its rhythm, boots on cobblestones, the whicker of horses, the scrape of a broom. But there's a faint change in the air, as if the warmth of the kitchens lingers in the hands that carry bread, in the quiet satisfaction of a full mouth before another hour's work. The gates to the kitchen yard close softly. Inside, the cooks are already turning to the next meal, their thoughts leaving breakfast behind. Outside, in the outer court, the taste of it will carry through the day. The palace inhales again, deeper this time. Breakfast has thinned into memory and ledger marks. The air is cooler at the edges, warmer at the center, and the kitchens move into their long, patient afternoon prelude. You can feel it underfoot, a change in tempo, from quick trays and hot cups to slow bowls and steady boards. It's the hour when knives are tuned like instruments, when dough learns its future, when herbs give up their first stories to the room. A runner opens the storeroom shutters and the light slides in over sacks stacked like short, solid clouds. wheat, rice, chickpeas, lentils, each labeled in a clerk's tidy hand. You help heave a sack of flour onto a bench. It lands with the soft thud of snow that has opinions. A baker slices the top and buries a wooden scoop, then tests the sift between finger and thumb as if deciding whether this flour is in a generous mood. Mainstream fact: palace breads did not end with morning. Flatbreads for afternoon stews, sesame rounds for messengers, and fine white loaves for the inner apartments all required fresh doughs. Many kitchens kept a hammer aniseed, a mother dough or starter, set aside under cloth to seed the next batch. It's practical alchemy. Yesterday teaching tomorrow to rise. You follow the baker to a long, low table dusted like dawn. He tips a measured hill of flour, makes a well with a practiced spiral, and pours in warm water alive with a ladle of yesterday's starter. Salt arrives as a pinch you can hear more than see, a minimal punctuation. His hands move in quiet arcs, fold, turn, press with the heel, fold again. The dough goes from shaggy to sure beneath his palms, a slow gathering of intent. Listen, he says, and you do, not with your ears but your wrists, until the resistance turns friendly. Quirky tidbit: some bakers swear a dough knows if you're frowning. They'll crack a joke or hum a silly tune to keep their hands light. A junior apprentice obliges with a whispered epic about a heroic spoon rescuing a lost olive from an ocean of yogurt. It is neither short nor epic, and it does the trick. Joke 1 earns a few flowery smirks that help the gluten along. On a nearby table, a line of thick-bellied clay pots waits for chickpeas. A scullion pours the pale beans from a jar. They patter like a tiny rain. He rinses them twice in cool water, palms rubbing them as if waking old friends. Into a wide basin they go with a pinch of baking soda and a sprig of dried thyme, an old kitchen habit, and then they're left to drink until evening. In the morning they'll become a stew with onions and a quiet spoon of pepper paste. Today, they are future written in water. A rhythm gathers at the herb table. Bunches of parsley stand like tidy forests in a clay jar. Mint, dill, and tarragon make green shadows on wood. Two cooks pinch stems and rock their knives, the sound a soft tack-tack, tack-tack that slots neatly between the sigh of bellows and the fountain's far laughter. The motion is economical. Gather, tuck fingers, slice, gather the next. You're given a small pile of dill and a narrow blade. Your first cuts are cautious, then less so, and soon your wrist learns the recipe your mouth can't recite. Across the court, a pot of mild broth hums, bones from yesterday's roast set to give one more kindness. The smell threads through the air like a low note. A steward dips a tasting spoon, nods once, adds a crushed clove of garlic the size of a fingernail, and says nothing more. He does not need to. Historians still argue whether palace kitchens kept separate broths always simmering, meat, fowl, and vegetable, or made them ad hoc as menus demanded. Budget lists show regular purchases of bones and greens, while cookbooks of the era suggest the pot often dreamed under the lid between meals. In practice, the answer here is simple. There is usually something kind simmering somewhere. On another bench, rice is washed in a copper basin, the water turning cloudy then clearing with each rinse. A young cook shakes the bowl in small circles, letting the grains swirl. His teacher watches the cloudiness sigh from milk to mist to almost nothing, then taps the rim. Enough. The rice drains in a fine mesh sieve, then rests like a field after rain. Later, butter and broth will coax it into palav that holds together the way a good sentence holds its meaning. The spice shelf gets a quieter visit now. No saffron this hour, just cumin winked out with 2 fingers into a dish of onions softening in olive oil. The onions go glassy, then the cumin wakes and the room inhales at once, a shared, involuntary approval. A cook lifts the pan and leans it toward you so the scent can shake your shoulders loose. This is the chorus, he says. You believe him. Quirky tidbit. One elderly herb woman taps each bunch of parsley sharply against the board before chopping. To shake loose the gossip, she claims. To dislodge dust, says her apprentice. To annoy the cat, mutters a boy, right on cue as Zentsville materializes to investigate flying green confetti. The cat sneezes with immense dignity and sits on the clean corner of a towel as if this had been the plan all along. Joke 2 takes a bow. The cat refuses to acknowledge the audience. Bread returns to your hands. The dough you helped knead has relaxed under cloth. When the baker presses a finger, the dent springs back like a polite yes. He divides it with a bench knife into even moons, tucks the edges under to make tight rounds, and lines them on boards dusted with bran. The rounds rest under linen, breathing little flour ghosts each time the cloth lifts. A junior reaches to touch, a senior slaps the air near his knuckles. Patience rises too, he says. I in the corner, a samovar whispers. Tea for the workers, sage today, steeps in a squat pot, it smell clean as a swept step. A cup is pressed into your hand with a shrug that means of course you're tired. Everyone is. Its warmth works down the throat like kindness wearing wool. Near the door, two women pit olives with the focus of jewelers. The split fruit falls into a bowl with orange peel and thyme. Oil glazes everything into a small afternoon. One woman fits an olive around a peeled almond and smiles to herself. For the clerk who says he cannot eat olives, she says. He eats these. Joke 3 stays local, traveling no further than their shared grin. A steward reads from a slate, lamb stew at the outer court, fish if the boats arrive, palav for the officers, greens with yogurt for the pages. He dots the air with his stylus where each dish will land, as if mapping a minor constellation. Runners peel off to their stations. A bell sounds once, merely a reminder that time has a slope. Mainstream fact again, palace recipes often moved by season more than by whim. Spring bent the table toward herbs and fresh milk. Summer offered eggplant, cucumbers, and sherbets that tasted like shade. Autumn brought quince, grape molasses, and walnuts. Winter deepened soups and breads and put cloves in the air. Today, if you had to name the season by smell alone, you'd choose late spring pretending to be early summer, green, dairy soft, with a promise of tomatoes somewhere still attached to their vines. The rhythm continues. Chickpeas settle. Rice breathes. Dough memorizes its shape. Herbs fall into neat green maps. The broth becomes itself and then, almost imperceptibly, becomes more than that. A junior burns his finger and turns it toward the light like a tiny moon. Someone touches a slice of cold onion to it, a palace remedy older than rules. Historians still argue whether afternoons like this were planned to the minute or allowed to find their own pace between the fixed points of service. Ledgers offer times, stories offer weather, moods, and cats. Your body, learning the kitchen's grammar, thinks both are true. The clock provides scaffolding. The hands build the day inside it. You pause at the doorway and let the room add itself to your memory in layers. Flour settling like snow, dill in neat commas, rice shining like little fish in a copper pond, a cat pretending to be uninterested in everything it supervises, a baker's knuckles pressing the future into rounds. A pot whispering in words only steam understands. In a little while, fires will be stoked higher, pans will parade across the stoves, and the kitchens will lift their voices again. For now, the palace is in the middle of its breath, the generous, necessary part where chorus becomes verse and rough plans turn tender. You take another sip of sage tea, tie your apron string again, and reach for a knife that already knows how to fit your hand. The bell for the midday meal has not yet rung, but the kitchens are already shifting into that subtle, anticipatory hum you've come to recognize, the sound of final touches being made to a dozen small things at once. You move with the current, from bench to stove, across the familiar constellation of smells and sounds that has unfolded since dawn. Breakfast has long since retreated into the past. Now the kitchens are preparing the last notes of its echo before the next symphony begins. On the largest table, the rounds of bread you helped shape this morning have risen into gentle domes. The baker lifts each one, sets it onto a wooden peel, and with a flick of his wrist slides it into the deep, glowing mouth of the oven. A low orange light washes the bricks, and the air tastes faintly of char and wheat. Mainstream fact: the palace ovens were often domed brick structures with a wide hearth, allowing multiple types of bread to bake in a single firing. Loaves for the Sultan's household were sometimes scored with specific patterns so they could be distinguished from those for the outer courts. From the other side of the kitchen, a copper pot of chickpeas is ladled into a tall tureen. The broth is pale gold, scented with thyme from the morning soak. A young cook drops in curls of lemon peel as it's carried toward the service counter, a last-minute flourish that no one announces but everyone notices. Quirky tidbit: in some corners of the palace, lemon peels were treated almost like charms. A curl dropped into a pot before serving was said to invite good digestion and good conversation. Whether that's superstition or simply experience, the smell is enough to make your mouth think kindly about whatever comes next. A steward stands at the head of the service line, his wax tablet at the ready. Plates are filled in the order he calls, first the officers' hall, then the scribes, then the musicians' wing. Each tray is layered like a page, bread at the base, bowls above, cups nested in their corners, and sometimes a small dish of pickled vegetables tucked in as a quiet afterthought. Historians still argue whether the exact sequence of serving was a matter of hierarchy, efficiency, or both. Some records suggest deliberate ranking, others hint that the kitchen's geography alone dictated who ate first. Watching now, you suspect it's a blend, with a healthy measure of whichever runner gets here fastest in the mix. From the spice shelf, a pinch of sumac dusts a dish of greens with yogurt, staining the white with a rose-colored ring. In a smaller pan, butter foams before being poured over pilav, releasing a scent that seems to lift the ceiling a little higher. The cooks work in pairs now, one plating, the other adjusting or garnishing, not because the food needs it, but because they want it to leave the kitchen looking like it belongs to the palace. Joke one comes from a young apprentice who, while wiping a plate's rim, murmurs, "We polish it so the Sultan sees his reflection and mistakes it for a new servant." The senior beside him doesn't laugh, but his shoulders shake just enough to betray the effort. In a quiet corner, Zensfil the cat has reappeared, curling himself into the warmth beside the bread oven. His tail thumps once when someone walks by with a tray of fish, then settles back into stillness. He seems to know the meal is almost ready, and that a morsel might find him if he waits long enough. The last trays are loaded. A final check, bowls level, cups steady, lids fitted snug over anything likely to spill. Runners take them up in practiced grips, their steps firm but not hurried. The sound of their departure, the shuffle of shoes, the clink of cups on trays, trails off toward the echoing corridors beyond the kitchen doors. Quirky tidbit: some stewards timed the runners' trips with sandglasses, not to scold, but to record how long a dish remained in motion before reaching its destination. The belief was that food had a window of virtue. After leaving the kitchen, a brief, invisible hourglass of taste and temperature. When the last runner has gone, a kind of sigh moves through the room. Cooks lean against tables, untying aprons, sipping the dregs of their tea. The ovens close their mouths, the stoves dim their flames, and the scent of the meal drifts after the departing trays like a friendly shadow. Joke too comes from the gray-bearded washer, who lingers by the drying rack. Now we wait for them to bring it all back dirty again. He's not wrong. You can almost see the loop of the day forming in his mind, from basin to basin. Historians still argue whether moments like this, the lull between service and clean-up, were treasured or simply filled with smaller, quieter chores. Looking around, you think it's both. The calm feels earned, but the hands are never idle for long. The baker draws the last loaves from the oven and sets them on the table. The crusts crack softly as they cool, releasing steam that smells like home dressed in silk. Someone cuts one open, hands out small pieces. The bread's heat stings your fingers, but you don't let go. Joke 3 is unspoken. No matter how much bread the palace sends out, the best piece is always the one you steal before the steward sees you. You chew slowly, listening to the bread's soft crumble in your mouth. The kitchens are quiet now, the noise outside faded to a distant hum. The day will keep going, more meals, more trays, more basins of water. But breakfast has given up its last task, and you have walked every step of its journey. The palace fades around you, its edges softened by steam and warm air. You imagine the courtyards dimming, the clatter of trays falling away into muffled echoes. Somewhere beyond the kitchen walls, bread is being broken, honey is being tasted, cups are being drained in slow sips. But here, the motion has stilled. The air is thick with the last traces of cinnamon and baked wheat, a scent that settles into the folds of your clothing. The warmth from the ovens lingers like a shawl across your shoulders. You let your eyes half close and picture the tiled floors of the kitchen stretching out under soft light, the shadows deepening at the corners. Even the fountain's laughter in the courtyard has slowed to a murmur, its trickle a gentle thread winding through the quiet. The cats have claimed their warm places, curled in round, breathing shapes. Somewhere a kettle clicks softly as it cools, the sound small enough to be mistaken for the sigh of someone drifting toward sleep. You think about the bread, the herbs, the trays carried through arches and across courtyards. About the hands that shaped and stirred and wiped and polished, moving together in the rhythm of the day. And about how each of those motions, large or small, is now finished, tucked into the safe, slow hours that follow. Your own breath finds that same rhythm, steady and unhurried. The last light through the high windows shifts and softens, and the kitchens dissolve into stillness. Let the warmth wrap around you. Let the day's noise fade to a whisper. And if you drift, let it be into a place where the air always smells of baking bread, where the walls hold the quiet, and where every moment belongs only to rest.